Right. Okay.
My name is Mahesh. I did my MBA from HEC back in 2015-2016 in finance. Before the MBA, I was an engineer back in India. I worked for about 4 or 5 years. Then I lived in Germany for 3 years, worked in Air Liquide. After my MBA, I spent some amount of time in Australia, and then finally I came back to India to work in Indian startup ecosystem with a boutique investment bank that I'm working right now called Radix Capital. We work with early stage startups and help them raise financing. As I told you, Radix Capital is an early stage, works with early stage startups. Early stage is a very fluid term, but generally Series A sort of levels, which means that a startup has been around for 3-4 years and then now they are starting to make revenues. This is the stage where we come in, and then we basically help them raise capital. That's one of the things that we do, but we also help them move from Series A to Series B, C, D levels, which means a startup typically evolves from being just an individual-centric to a process-centric sort of an organization, within which what I do is Radix itself is a startup. So one of the things that we do is help other startups. The other thing is to build our own startup. So I do everything. So from deal sourcing to interacting with the investors, to recruiting people for our own setup, to build our own systems, to marketing, etc., etc. Everything that a startup involves. It is one of the largest ecosystems in the world, very vibrant. India is also a very young sort of a nation. So all that meant that the ecosystem itself is very vibrant. Bangalore, the city that I'm in right now, it's very tech heavy. So a lot of tech sort of ecosystem, a lot of technological innovations. So all in all, a lot of positive energy in terms of building new things, in terms of disrupting old inefficient ways of doing things and using technology to change, affect lives in better ways. So all that attracted me to come back, and that's also a DNA within the Indian startup ecosystem that's around. And main challenges also stem from the fact that India is a very young country. A lot of engineers get produced, a lot of also young business professionals, but it's very young. Even the Indian startup ecosystem is very young. So a lot of challenges come from not having, let's say, good advice available to all these different startups who want to now graduate from being a startup to being a big company or middle-sized company. So they lack the ecosystem that can support them in terms of mentorship, in terms of advice, and also India being a capital deficient country, capital is always one of the issues that all the startups face. A lot of startups die. It's called a valley of death or something in English, which means that a lot of startups start, but due to a lack of mentorship or advice or capital, they die in the initial few years. So that's still a challenge as a system that it will evolve and it will get better. But right now, that's, I think, the main challenge that the Indian startups face. I got introduced to HEC Incubator through a friend, Simon, who was already in the incubator, and Stasien. He was working in a startup. He was also trying to build his own accelerator incubator. And the most exciting part about that setup that HEC has built is it's trying to promote a startup. A lot of other universities, good universities, are also doing it because they have a huge network that they can leverage across industries, across countries, continents. So that ecosystem helps develop because it's an upcoming ecosystem. That attracted me to join this. Overall, what it does basically is that it gets the startups together in the same space as investors, as big corporates, as experts from other fields who can possibly come and help them with advice, with market reach, with capital, whatever that they need. It's an informal sort of system, but I think the best that it works is that it gives you an informal access to people from different functions and different regions and different industries. For me, HEC Incubator, it's as I tell you, it's an exciting space to be in the startup ecosystem in general. So what anyone here tries to do is to work with new technologies, work with new concepts, and trying to make a difference. So for me, HEC Incubator gives me that opportunity to interact with interesting people, trying to do interesting things. They are right now in France, but all across the world. It sort of gives me an access into that whole world, one of the ways. HEC, in fact, what HEC could do better is, right now it's very heavy in France or in Europe in general, but France mainly, but it can expand using its alumni network, using projects like these, for example, but it can tap into different markets, different places, different industries, and probably collate all that data, all that insight, all that information, and make it a stronger program. I have a very mathematical answer for this. So I was already living in Europe before I applied to HEC. I was in Germany, living in Frankfurt. So I was, like all the other prospective students, I was applying to a lot of schools. So Europe was the primary region I wanted to apply to, and India. So that was one factor. The other factor being that some of my colleagues or friends were already in HEC. So I had visited HEC before, and I liked the people there, liked the space that was there. So those two were the primary reasons. Apart from trying to apply to schools which have sort of similar vibe, a similar sort of alumni network, similar pedagogical professorship, etc. I think that's common across all the good schools in Europe, but those were the primary reasons. It was a very mathematical decision to apply to a few schools, and HEC, fortunately or unfortunately for them, accepted me, and then I ended up in HEC. Of course, there are students, there are colleagues who come from all the different parts of the world, so the kind of perspective that you get. Today I have friends in Mexico. I was speaking to a friend in Japan who has a Korean wife about kimchi explosions, and a few months ago I was speaking to a friend in France about Kandinsky and his art. So the kind of exposure that you get from HEC or any community of this kind is pretty invaluable. So my advice in this day and age would be to just be a little more patient. I know it's a very anxious world, so don't get anxious. Things fall into place eventually. Plus, anyone who wants to work in France, please learn French. It helps.